Thank you, Lo, and thank you to our panelists. Tools but not goals. I particularly love Eugenio's reframing of the Cedric Price question there, of technology is the answer, but what is the question? The tools themselves cannot really provide the questions that we strive to answer. That is ultimately left to the public, to the mayors, and to the forms of governance that are put in place from there. So, yeah, I thought that was a really inspiring set of discussion, and also some of the discussions there by Eugenio and others there about really the kind of bodies we need to advance these ideas and provide those governance structures in a world of changing technology so that cities don't get caught on the back foot again as they did in the early 2010s. Well, now we're going to turn to that always uncomfortable question, which is, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for these incredible new technologies, integration and systems here? And to continue that conversation, as I mentioned from CoMotion Miami this past spring, I want to invite Mauricio back and his panelists onto the stage to carry forward the discussion of SUMIT and the kind of new financing mechanisms that we can create that are available to us to help cities continue their decarbonization goals and continue their efforts here to create more resilient transportation networks, even in a time of incredible uncertainty in the global financial markets and in various government financing mechanisms. So with that, I'd like to invite back Mauricio, of course, as you've seen, visiting professor at Pennsylvania, co-chair of SUMIT, and of course, former mayor of Quito, Ecuador. Mauricio, please, and your panelists.
Hello again. We are gathered here at a pivotal moment because the financial outlook for sustainable transport in cities is both daunting and urgent. Urban areas will be needing approximately $50 trillion by the year 2040 to develop low emissions vehicle fleets, to modernize aging public transportation, and to build electric vehicle charging infrastructure needed for a decarbonized future. Yet, we are facing a staggering $10 trillion shortfall to do this. And cities in the global south are, of course, facing this challenge, but also cities in the global north. Actually, urban areas around the world are at the forefront of this transition, which demands not only more investment, but I would say smarter, more innovative financial solutions. And this is the spirit, this is the driving force behind SUMIT, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Investment Task Force, which was launched last April during CoMotion Miami, bringing together mayors, academics, representatives from the private sector and from international finance institutions to develop innovative solutions that will help cities access the necessary funding to advance urban sustainable mobility agendas. And to discuss some of the new trends in this particular area, we have today a fantastic group of speakers with us, starting with my left, here with Professor Eugenie Birch from the University of Pennsylvania. She's the co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research and a member of SUMIT. Hazem Galal, also a member of SUMIT and a global partner from PwC. Mayor Nasiphi Moya, whom you heard recently about. She is the co-chair of the U20 and, of course, executive mayor of the city of Tshwane in South Africa. Mr. Ajay Pandey, who's the vice president for investment solutions at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And last but not least, Marvin Rees, who's the former mayor of Bristol and a member of the House of Lords in the UK. So let's start with Eugenie. We know that with your vast experience around the world in urban issues, you have seen many interesting experiences and good practices. You were part of the Planning Commission in New York, and you can share with us some of the financing mechanisms that are being advanced in New York to finance aging infrastructure on mobility. Could you please tell us about that?
Certainly, Mauricio. The question, we were told this morning to ask the right question. And so the question is,
Yeah.
how does a city, which aims to stay as a world city, transition to zero emissions with an aging infrastructure and very, very complicated institutional arrangements? It currently has a president of the nation who's not eager to support this sort of thing, but it does have a state government that has pledged that by 2040, 85% of emissions will be reduced. It also has a regional responsibility through the transportation organizations that manage the system, in particular the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which has an area of 5,000 square miles and several jurisdictions within it, as well as services 15 million people. And within that, MTA has 7 subsidiaries, including the one that governs New York City, the Transit Authority. How does it deal with the public piece of transportation? And then we have the private piece of transportation. 90% of the emissions in New York City, for example, are produced by passenger cars. And the desire of the mayor and of the locality is to reduce the amount of emissions and also to have a much more interesting and diverse multimodal system. So what do you do? Well, first of all, the state passes a law to create the clean mobility actions that it wants. The MTA reports to the state and also is in charge of these city entities. The MTA has a capital budget of $68 billion, but it has to divide it among 7 subsidiaries, 3 of which are responsible to the city. One runs 5,000 buses over 350 routes. That same transit authority has 6,000 subway cars over 250 miles of routes. And the question is how to keep this up to standard, yet change to the zero emissions. So among the things that it has to rely on are its capital budget. And the capital budget is funded by two things. First, by dedicated taxes called lockbox taxes that go into that budget, and also its ability to float bonds. The big innovation that has occurred recently for this budget is something called congestion pricing. This was, of course, a huge battle for the state and city to accomplish this congestion pricing, which went into action last September and already is predicted to raise about $500 million. And that will go to supporting the mass transit in the city itself. So that's one way that they are going to help finance this. Also, because of the ability to have the lockbox funding, they can use that lockbox funding to produce the revenues to support bonds, and green bonds in particular. They're going to, the MTA is going to float about $40 billion of bonds. Of that, about 40% of that will be in green bonds, and that can be used to bring the equipment up to standard as well as to reduce emissions. So that's on the public side. On the private side, the effort is to try to get the conversion of passenger cars to EVs. But you can't do that unless you have charging stations. And how do you pay for the charging stations, and where do you get those located in a city that's very, very populated? And so this city has engaged a partnership with Con Edison, the electric utility, to help fund those charging stations. They'll be use the bonding ability of the fees of Con Edison to help pay for those charging stations. There are a number of other things that are happening. In particular, years ago, New York State engaged in something called the RGGI initiative. This is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, in which a cap is put on the power production, a cap of the emissions. And if the power plants want to exceed those emissions, they go to auction and buy those. And those funds go back to the state, that then goes back into some of these experimental and innovative things that are happening. And among the other innovative things that are happening is funding to help provide micro mobility, that is scooters and things like that. That funding will be given to vulnerable communities to help create that kind of work. So these are some of the things that are being done.
That's really interesting to see, public and private funding sources coming together under a comprehensive lens to foster not only innovative financial mobility solutions, but also to address aging infrastructure. So I think that combination is quite interesting, right?
Right. I also forgot to tell you about the bikes. So they started a bike situation. Here they had to get an interesting group of people to support this. First of all, they had to get the local Department of Transportation to put the pathways in. Second of all, they had to get someone to pay for these bikes. And they worked with Lyft, the Uber of New York City, that is in charge. They've given this out as a franchise to them to do that. Uber then turned around and sold the branding to Citibank. And so it's a combination of the city providing in-kind space, paths and places for parking, Lyft providing the equipment and maintaining the equipment, and city helping pay for that through the branding.
Quite interesting. Thank you, Eugenie. We always talk about how public money will never be enough to fund the necessary changes to advance an urban sustainable development agenda, and particularly around mobility. We always think about how to bring in the private sector. And one of the ways to do that is, of course, through public-private partnerships. And I love the way how Hazem referred to PPPs, because he calls them, he says that they should be called, actually, ideally, properly prepared projects. So can you please, Hazem, elaborate a little bit on why do you think this should be the approach?
Thank you, Mauricio. It has to do with timing. Many times the public sector, be it at the national level or at the local government level, will just assume that the private sector will engage with their projects. And that's not necessarily true, because at the end of the day, it has to be financially attractive for the private sector. And when you think about the life cycle, be it starting from policy, going through the planning, to the actual financing, through the operations, and then feedback, many times when the government is planning a project, they would only start to engage the private sector during the actual financing and operations process, or part of the process. It has to happen much earlier. And we've seen that the uptake for those type of projects where actually that process started earlier, when those opportunities were co-designed almost with the private sector, it becomes much more successful in terms of the uptake as compared to whenever these projects were designed in isolation from the private sector. So timing is quite critical to engage the private sector from the beginning. The other point is a better understanding of the different roles that the private sector can play. Because the private sector could be a financer, private equity, financial institutions, and all of that. It can be an asset owner, it can be an asset operator, and different types of involvement. And many times also from the government side, they would just say, well, the private sector needs to do this, without really a proper definition or understanding of these different roles that the private sector would play, and also how these roles would differ by industry. I mean, these roles in mobility are very different from healthcare, very different from any other vertical or sector. So that lack of understanding on behalf of the government in terms of how the private sector can engage is very important. And then the last point is about the co-creation of procurement models that are innovative. I mean, procurement is usually very mundane. People shy away from it to speak about it, but at the end of the day, if you cannot involve the private sector in a way that prompts creativity and innovation while still being fair, you will not get the best ideas in your projects. So these are three very important points: the timing, the understanding of the different roles, and the ways of engaging the private sector through procurement and other innovative ways that could actually get them early on.
Any particular best practice that you would like to share that have been successfully addressing these 3 points?
Usually, the technology sector actually has been more at the front end of this. I mean, of course, you have smart metering, in mobility sector, you have tolling. All of these are very almost standard ways of engaging the private sector. However, also we can look into the technology sector where sometimes it's a pay-as-you-go type engagement. You only pay for the cloud space or for the services that you actually consume as a city. So I think there's a lot of risk sharing and allocation that we can look at in other sectors as well in order to come up with new ways of innovative partnerships and relationships in the mobility sector.
Thank you, Hazem. We already heard from New York, from Eugenie, so a global north city. Now let's hear from the global south. Mayor Moya, I know you have a very ambitious mobility agenda for your city. And I know of many mayors who have this type of very ambitious agendas, but then they have to confront a regulatory framework that is not necessarily the most friendly in terms of the legal authority cities have to undertake this type of projects and how they must engage with all different levels of government. So can you share what has been your experience in coordinating with the national government in South Africa to advance this type of initiatives?
Thank you so much, Mauricio. I think, first of all, this is a very important discussion when it comes to advancing our cities. If we can't answer the question to how will both the residents and business be mobile in your city, how do they interact? So we talk about livable cities, but that livable city, it also depends on how easy your residents and business move in your city. So it's quite a complex approach that we are confronted with. That you firstly, in South Africa, we're integrating different types of transportation models. And what complicates it a bit is that the mandate is shared across 3 spheres. So it's not a core business of the municipality in South Africa to run transportation, but it's inevitable. There's functions that are run by the provincial government. For instance, our metro project, Gautrain, is managed at a provincial level, but the network is in the city, connecting with other cities in our province. And then you have the authorities, the national government. So negotiating your way around it, but it hasn't been proven impossible because we have some, delegations from national government where, for instance, the BRT system is now delegated. It's an underfunded mandate now to local municipalities, where we have incorporated the taxi industry to own the BRT as part of the transformational agenda. There's national roads in our city, there's provincial roads in our city, and then there's municipal roads. But there is so that comes with complexity because not everything is in the autonomy of the city, but there are areas where we are autonomous as municipalities. Every year we must produce an integrated developmental plan, and of course issues of mobility and transportation is part of that. We are autonomous in the projects that we control in terms of the infrastructure that you lay, where you lay that infrastructure, the designs and everything. But to what Hazem was also saying, in the procurement, we do have, for instance, of buses. The city has the authority to design and demand certain type of buses, which in the city, a few years ago, we procured EVs, electric buses as well. And obviously the infrastructure that comes with that, the charging station. So there is some degree of autonomy that we get, but the complexity of, having to go through provincial government and national government, it doesn't make it easy for a seamless decision making. But what is also quite unique and encouraging now in the city, so the city of Tshwane is an automotive city. About 40% of vehicles that are produced in South Africa are produced in the city of Tshwane. So we do have the likes of BMW plants in the city. Recently, with Gauteng government and national government, we have a Tshwane Automotive Special Economic Zone. So that gives us another leg where we can also demand in terms of the, the commitment to reduce the carbon footprint. But what is more encouraging of late is we just approved a development where they will be assembling EV, about 20,000 per year. And I think the EVs are the future. And to have a private sector coming to settle in our city with this, but also not just for the assembly line, but for skills development as well. So it's quite encouraging. But I think as a municipality, the thing that I liked when we attended CoMotion Miami was the elevation of this conversation. I don't think for municipalities like ours, where the mandate is water and electricity first, I don't think we elevate this conversation enough. And my view is that if we're going to advance the cities, mobility is going to be the foundation of that advancement. So, but it's not easy for us to run through the different spheres, but I do believe we've got enough room to do enough. As long as you can sell your vision to other spheres, I think we'll be fine. So I don't think it's a crisis yet, but it could be easier, of course.
And that has huge implications also in terms of financing, right? The coordination with different levels of government, not only for implementing these projects, but also to get finance for them. Thank you for sharing that, Mayor. Ajay, we know that the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is not only providing funding for cities to undertake sustainable mobility projects, but also supporting them to develop the technical capacity to put together technically sound, bankable projects. This is a key issue because it's not only a matter of supply, supplying financing opportunities, but also demand, fostering the demand capacity from cities in terms of having them, being ready to develop this type of bankable projects. What is the bank doing regarding this?
So thank you very much for having me in this CoMotion discussion. This particularly urban transport and the involvement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So let me just give you some figures. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was set up in 2016, and during the last 9 years, we have grown to become almost $65 billion bank. This transport is the highest, is the sector where we have a highest investment. Almost 22% of our investment is in the transport. So we have funded public transport systems to the municipalities, local bodies, and also to the metros. For example, in China, we have funded in the Liaoning province, this Panjim Municipal Corporation, this complete urban transportation system. In India, the Chennai Metro, Mumbai Metro, is that if you want to make a project bankable, you have to ensure that many of these policies should be aligned. And let me give you an example. Let's say if you are trying to, there is a municipal body which has the current urban transportation system, which are gasoline based, and then you want to reduce and move towards the electric mobility and also the entire smart system. How do you transition? And for that, what you require is a complete integrated approach, and that will require many of the innovative ways that you can actually make the project bankable. For example, transit oriented development. The land monetization, many of those, like for example, many of those metro stations, they can become a complete, the commercial center. And so we have good example. We may not have, some of them we may not have finance, But then we have a good example like, the Hong Kong, you have a complete transit-oriented development. Then similarly, even in Beijing, each of these metro stations is a big commercial hub. And so similarly, or for example, in India, some of the metro stations are big commercial hub, and that actually makes your project very, very bankable. So what is required is that your urban policy, when you are doing urban planning, some of the land, near your entire, the center, how can you monetize and make it commercially viable? Secondly, another very, very good example was, Panjim municipal in the Liaoning province of China. I mean, there they wanted to in their financial model, they included the original, the usual delivery business as a part of the, the passenger bus system. For example, if the bus is going to a particular rural area, so it can do some delivery, it can do the transportation of goods. So all those they are very, very innovative models, and we have actually tried. So what we are doing is that we also have another instrument, which is the policy-based lending. So what we do is that if we are only, let us say, not only the financing the project, but we are working with the authorities to evolve the policy, and then there are very good policies which may have worked elsewhere. Can that policy, such policy, be replicated with appropriate adjustments? And this is exactly what we do. So what we do is that many of the UN organizations like UN Escape, we organize, the common workshop, conferences, where we invite people from the different countries, and then the exchange, and then at a certain level, we say that, all right, this is how it is, and we can give you some policy-based lending, and so that we can enhance this technical capacity and also build institutional strength and capacity, and then evolve or prepare bankable projects, and then at that stage also finance this project itself. So actually the 3 stages, upstream activities where we help the governments and then the municipal authorities to make appropriate policy, and for that, if some finance is required, we provide the finance, and then from there we help them prepare the projects, and when the projects are there, then we actually finance, and during the implementation of the project, we all provide all support. So it's almost end to end. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive description of the complexity of the process, but how integral it is in terms of supporting cities to plan, finance, and implement this type of projects. Marvin, you are a big champion of cities' climate finance. And as mayor of Bristol, you successfully implemented different deals with the private sector to bring in private investment into climate solutions for the city of Bristol. One of them is a flagship initiative, the Amresco deal that you developed as mayor. Can you share with us what were the key factors for success in bringing private sector investment for the city of Bristol, those that you think could be also applicable for the mobility sector?
Yeah, I'll do that, and then just a reflection on the panel as well. So yeah, we did a deal, it's called Bristol City Leap. We've won quite a few awards for it. That's not what it's all about, but I guess the awards are a recognition that it was an innovation. Essentially is a financial deal that unlocks the technology that we already have to solve our challenges. And that's something that's important. Sometimes we talk about getting new innovations in. We have enough tech to solve 80% of the problem today. What we don't have are the financial vehicles that get it rolled out at scale and pace. So we bundled our public sector assets, 29,000 houses, our public land, our public buildings, our heat networks, and we offered 20 years to the private sector. Will you deliver these outcomes? We'll give you 20 years to deploy your technology on our land, buildings, and we want certain outcomes. Now, among the key factors is actually political commitment. So it was an innovation, there was risk, and we made a very expensive error during the course of that, getting that deal done. But I stood by it, right? I took that on the chin. We got some criticism, but it was necessary. Policy alignment was been mentioned earlier on. Because there are many things that we don't know need to happen, but what our private sector partners want to know is, if we enter into this deal, do we have solid partners? Are you going to be with us? Are you going to, go the full way? And importantly as well, we had assets, as I mentioned at the beginning. We had public sector assets. But if I can just reflect a little bit, just being at the end of this conversation, what strikes me is when we say what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? A couple of reflections on that. One is 55% of people live in cities today. By 2050, it's going to be 70%. That's the problem we have to solve, right? And we cannot leave solving that problem down to whether we happen to have leaders that can get the projects ready or whether we happen to get ducks in a line. We have to do that, right? There is no alternative to do that, because the consequences of not doing it, not just in terms of climate change, but climate displacement, bad politics, are really extreme. And it strikes me, just reflecting, we have all the component pieces. We know that there's lots of money out there. We know that we have rapid urbanization. We know we have the technology that needs to get deployed, and we have these global financial systems. And we have stories in isolated places that are great stories, great examples. But what we actually need is a bit of a world plan. I don't want to be too megalomaniac about it. We need to have an absolute deliverable intent to deliver the scale of urbanization and the kind of urbanization we need in place by 2050. Otherwise, we're going to be in a pretty bad spot as a planet.
Thank you so much, Marvin. I think that it's the perfect closure to our discussion. We have heard very different perspectives from a highly diverse panel, not only in terms of geographical representation, but also the sectors that have been represented here. Thank you so much to all of you. And this gives us an idea of how dynamic this landscape is. The challenge is huge, but as you can see, there are very interesting solutions being implemented. It's a matter of scale them up and disseminate them around the world. Thank you so much.